Hey guys! This will probably be my last video for the day, unless inspiration strikes later tonight and I can find appropriate lighting. Okay, so I wanted to cover the calling of the god and goddess for today so that we can get all of the plug and play aspects out of the way before in my next sequence of videos I cover the writing of the dedication rite. So there are a few things you need to consider for a dedication, ritual, or any ritual, and that's which god you're going to call. There's a misconception that in Wicca, the Lord and Lady are actual gods. They are a generic title for gods that the Gardnerians worshipped, that they used within their writings to forego having to say which gods they worshipped because it was oath-bound. So, the Lord and Lady are not themselves gods. They are titles for other gods. They can apply to several other gods, just like the triple goddess can apply to several goddesses, just like the horned god can apply to several gods. Those are not actual gods. You can still invoke the Lord and Lady in your ritual without having to choose a specific god and goddess it correlates to for that ritual. You can use it in, say, a dedication ritual, dedicating yourself to all those gods and goddesses that would fall within your worship, which is debatable which ones would do that. Some people say that the Norse gods won't at all. Some people say certain gods won't. Depends on who you talk to. I personally believe that some Norse gods and some other gods from various pantheons will not fit well within your worship because of the way they were historically worshipped. But that's a different story. So you have to choose, if you're not going to do the generic Lord and Lady, which god and goddess to invoke, or which entire pantheon. If you're devoting yourself to an entire pantheon, I don't see a problem with it calling a lot of gods to be present at your ritual this time. I see that as a problem with a very specific ritual, but in a dedication, it's not as big of a problem for me to understand. If you're going to do a specific god and goddess or a specific set of deities that you're going to work with for this ritual, especially for a dedication ritual, but for all rituals, you need to have worked with them before. Gods and goddesses are not correspondences to be picked up and used at will. You need to have a relationship with that god or that goddess before you call them to do something for you in ritual. If you're doing a love spell, you shouldn't just get online and be like, oh, Aphrodite can help me with that. I've never worked with her before, but why wouldn't she help me? If I was Aphrodite, I wouldn't help you if you just called me to help you when you needed me and forgot about me the rest of the time. I'm not saying you have to be a dedicant of that god to call on them to help you in workings, but you need to at least know them. You need to do meditations, like rituals in honor of them before you start calling them to help you with spells. And if that seems like too much work for you, then maybe you should stick with the generic Lord and Lady. Or maybe you should rethink the path as a whole. That sounded a little mean, but it's true. It's a real big pet peeve of mine when people are just like, what goddess should I call it? And be like, which ones have you worked with? They're like, none. Why would you call on them then? Anyway, so for your dedication, you're probably going to be calling on a specific set of deities that you've worked with before, dedicating yourself to them. Unless you're doing your just generic Wicca dedication, in which case you're probably going to call on the Lord and Lady unless you have worked with specific gods. As I've said, I'm rambling. Anyway, so you choose your god and goddess, and you're going to write very specific callings to them if it's a specific god and goddess. If it's a Lord and Lady, it's kind of difficult to tailor your calling to be very unique. It can be done. I just find it harder when there's a generic thing that I'm calling, you know? It's hard to really make it unique to me and make it actually mean something. It means a lot more to me when I'm calling a specific god or goddess. That's me personally, though, so you might find it to be completely different. So you write your calls to them, and then you need to decide what order to call them in. There's no right or wrong way to do it. A lot of people will call the god first because they feel like the goddess needs to make this entrance and have all eyes on her and blah blah blah, and she's more important. No. You can call the goddess first, you can call the god first, whichever. I personally have a problem if people take that view because the goddess is obviously not more important than the god. I mean, I can see the whole she wants to make an entrance depending on which goddess you're calling, but the god that you're calling might want to make an entrance too, so you have to take into account their personalities for that one. You should also, if you choose to use a tool for this section, and I probably should have covered this in the quarter calls too, but most people see the difference between the athame and the wand as one being fire energy and the other being air, and depending on which one you see that way, you're going to see one as more commanding than the other. Personally, I see the athame as fire. I see it as more commanding than the wand. The wand is more requesting something. So I usually use my athame for casting the circle. Or so usually I'll use my wand for that because it's more tailored to me personally. But most people use the athame because it commands the space. It commands the energy of that space. If you're using a tool in your salute to whatever you're calling, I would use a wand. It seems more polite to me. It also depends on what you're calling. If you're calling the quarters, if you're not calling the guardians of the watchtowers, you might consider using an athame, but if you're calling the guardians, then I'd suggest using a wand. If you're calling your god and goddess, I'd suggest using a wand. Some people in their worship, and you can see this in some texts like Aradia, Gospel of the Witches, use a more commanding tone when they're calling their gods. That's effective depending on which god you're calling, so you really do need to know them to figure out how to call them. I personally have a very intimate relationship with my gods, and I don't think that they'd appreciate me commanding them around. And there's a mutual respect there that I would not command them, so yeah. So the writing of the call to the god and goddess is very personal, and it's very unique to you. I would not use a pre-written call to any god or goddess. Any particular god or goddess. I have used generic ones to the Lord and Lady in my eclectic rituals I've written for group work, but that's kind of different because it's harder for me to connect with the Lord and Lady because they're generic, as I said. So I would start from scratch. You can look for inspiration in poetry written about the god or goddess in question. You can look for inspiration from other invocations that people have written or rituals to that god or goddess. But I would really focus on this part of your ritual because this is serious. Like, this is where the bonds between you and the god and goddess are made. It's their first impression of you when you first call to them most of the time, unless you worked with them in other ways before, like meditation or whatever. If you're doing a ritual to get to know this person, this god or goddess, then it's the first impression, and it's very important. And you need to really focus on this one. That's really all I have to say about calling the god and goddess. It doesn't seem like a lot, but because there's not much else I can say to help you write your calls because it's so personal. But we are going to be revisiting the energy of the god and goddess in the ritual way later after we finish writing the entire ritual. We're going to go back. So you might want to look at that one too to figure out exactly what the energies are going to be like. But that's going to be a few weeks from now, or a few days at least, depending on how many videos I make a day. So I'll talk to you guys later.